Motel Acacia is not exactly a crowd favorite. With its low scores on IMDb and Letterboxd, it's easy to see why most people skip this one. On the surface, it looks like just another monster horror film, and for a lot of viewers, it didn't quite deliver. But I decided to give it a chance because sometimes even films that stumble in execution can surprise you with the ideas they try to explore. And as I watched Motel Acacia, I realized it had more on its mind than just scares.
It was for us. For emergency, just in case.
Beneath its uneven storytelling, it's also a movie about legacy, family curses, and even immigration. So in this video, let's take a closer look at the Filipino horror film everyone overlooked. Let's talk about Motel Acacia. Let me tell you the story. Motel Acacia begins in the Philippine wilderness, where a group of illegal loggers cut down a massive acacia tree in the dead of night. Things immediately take a supernatural turn. Eerie happenings, a sense of something ancient being disturbed. Out of nowhere, a foreigner appears, and somehow he manages to capture this monster and transport it halfway across the world. The film doesn't exactly explain why or how, but this mysterious figure becomes the keeper of the creature. Years later, he's running a motel in a remote snowy region with the help of his son JC. The motel isn't really a motel though. It's more like a cold underground fortress outfitted with surveillance cameras, bare walls, and even a pool. On the surface, it's a shelter for undocumented migrants, lured there with the promise of safe passage, fake documents, or a shot at crossing borders. Characters drop hints that they might be aiming for the US, Canada, or even Europe. But the truth is darker. The migrants aren't being helped at all. Instead, they're being fed to the monster, which has now taken the form of a bed, a grotesque twist on hospitality. As the story unfolds, the monster grows even more sinister, not just consuming victims but manifesting through the motel's wall, its pool, and even impregnating women. When JC learns the truth about his father's quote-unquote business, he's horrified. In the middle of a raging storm, they got into an accident, killing his father in the process. But things don't stop there. Stranded in the motel with more migrants, JC is forced to confront both the creature and his own complicity in what's happening. The final act spirals into chaos. The monster becomes nearly omnipresent, killing off characters one by one. In the climax, JC and two women attempt to escape by setting the motel on fire. One of them, Kathy, makes a run for it in a car, but ends up killed after being stopped by police, in a chilling sequence that blurs whether it's the monster or the system itself ending her life. Meanwhile, Angeli, who has been impregnated by the monster, meets a grotesque fate, fusing with a tree in the woods. In the end, JC survives, but at a cost. The motel is destroyed, the monster lingers, and JC declares he is now alone, carrying the weight of his father's sin and his own uncertain future. Alright, let's start with what went wrong with Motel Acacia first. One of the biggest hurdles Motel Acacia faces is its uneven performance. On one hand, JC Santos and Agot Isidro really carry the film. Santos brings that quiet intensity and vulnerability to JC, while Isidro gives Angeli a grounded presence that feels lived in. But once you look beyond them, the acting becomes a mixed bag. The foreign actors, in particular, come across like they're straight out of a B-movie horror.
But she knows something's responsible. Goodbye, my brother.
Their line delivery feels stiff, almost detached, as if they were unsure of the tone the film wanted to strike.
I've been through a lot.
Where's James? Where is he?
And because Motel Acacia is already balancing between horror, social commentary, and surreal imagery, those weaker performances pull you out of the immersion instead of drawing you in. And that leads to the second problem, the storytelling itself. The film sets up so many intriguing pieces: a father grooming his son to inherit a monstrous legacy, the exploitation of migrants, the unsettling transformation of the motel, but it struggles to weave them into a clear narrative. The rules of the monsters are inconsistent, the motivations of the father are left hazy, and some of the character choices feel more confusing than meaningful. Instead of a sharp commentary wrapped in horror, it sometimes feels like a collection of half-developed ideas fighting for attention. Finally, the pacing doesn't help. Scenes drag longer than they need to, while crucial moments like why this demonic bed exists in the first place or what the father really gains from feeding it are brushed aside. Horror thrives on building tension and payoff, but here, the tension often fizzles because the payoff either doesn't make sense or feels incomplete. So when you combine uneven performances, unclear monster logic, and scattered storytelling, Motel Acacia ends up with a lot of missed opportunities. You can see the ambition, but the execution holds it back from reaching the chilling, thought-provoking film it wants to be. For all its flaws, Motel Acacia isn't without merit. In fact, there are elements here that show just how ambitious Bradley Liu's vision really was. First off, the core concept is incredibly bold. A haunted bed that devours migrants sounds absurd on paper, but when you dig deeper, it's a daring metaphor, a literal embodiment of how broken systems consume the vulnerable. It is grotesque, strange, and definitely original. Even if the execution faltered, you can't deny that the film swings big in its ideas. And then there's JC Santos and Agot Isidro's performance. Santos' portrayal of JC, a son caught between duty to his father and his own morality, gives the film its emotional anchor. Isidro, on the other hand, makes Angeli both sympathetic and morally ambiguous, which adds layer to her character. Without them, the film might have completely collapsed under its weight, but their grounded acting keeps it watchable. Visually, the film also has its moments. The production design of the motel, cold, brutalist, and labyrinthine, feels unsettling even before the horror begins. The creature effects, though inconsistent, carry a disturbing, nightmarish quality, especially when the bed mutates into walls and pools. You can feel the ambition to merge body horror with psychological dread. Lastly, there's something to be said about the ambition of blending horror with social commentary. Few films dare to tackle immigration, systemic exploitation, and generational trauma within a horror framework. Motel Acacia doesn't quite stick the landing, but the attempt alone is noteworthy. It shows that Philippine cinema and Southeast Asian horror in general is willing to experiment beyond the typical jump scare formula. At its core, Motel Acacia is less about monsters and more about systems. The bed, grotesque as it is, works as a metaphor for how migrants are fed into machinery that thrives into their desperation. The promise of safe passage or new opportunities is dangled in front of them, only for them to be consumed, literally, by forces that see them only as expendable. What makes this theme hit harder is how the story strips away the idea of a haven. The motel, instead of being a place of rest, becomes a site of betrayal. It echoes the real-world struggle of undocumented migrants who often place their trust and their lives in the hands of people or systems that take advantage of their vulnerability. The foreign setting also emphasizes the idea of displacement. These migrants aren't quote-unquote at home. They're trapped in a liminal space, neither belonging here nor there, which mirrors the dehumanizing reality many migrants face when reduced to statistics, quotas, or burdens on society. At the heart of this theme is the character of JC. His struggle to resist his father's monstrous legacy mirrors how cycles of exploitation often get passed down. Do you comply and continue the system, or do you burn it all down even if it means being left with nothing? It is a haunting question, and one that reflects real-life social dilemmas. One of the more unsettling layers of Motel Acacia is the relationship between JC and his father. From the start, JC is being groomed to take over, not a business, but a cycle of horror. His father treats the motel and its monstrous rituals as something that must be preserved, like a twisted inheritance. This mirrors how cycles of violence, corruption, and exploitation often survive through generations. Sons inherit the sins of their fathers, not because they want to, but because the system around them forces them into it. JC's horror comes from realizing he doesn't just have a personal choice to make. He's entangled in a legacy that was forced into him. The bed monster itself can be read as a metaphor for his inherited curse. It consumes generation after generation, and unless someone actively resists it, The cycle continues. JC, when his father died, was supposed to be a breaking point, but the film shows how hard it is to truly escape what's been passed down. Even when he tries to burn it all down, he's still haunted, still trapped, still alone by the end. This theme lands heavily because it reflects real-world struggles, whether it's families caught in crime, corruption, poverty, or even personal cycles of abuse. Breaking away is never clean or easy. The sins of the past linger, and sometimes they cling to you like shadows you can't shake off. Motel Acacia is a strange film, messy in execution, uneven in performances, and filled with narrative gaps that leave you scratching your head. But at the same time, it carries themes that are far heavier than what you might expect from a horror film with a quote-unquote killer bet. Beneath the creature features surface is a story about exploitation, migration, and the curses passed down through generations. It is not a perfect film, but that's also what makes it interesting to revisit. While mainstream critics may dismiss it for its flaws, there's value in looking at what it tried to say, especially in the way it reflects real issues like immigration struggles, systemic abuse, and inherited trauma. At the end of the day, Motel Acacia may not stand as one of the best Filipino horror films, but it deserves a second look. Sometimes, even in flawed films, there are stories and metaphors worth digging into. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. Horror, no matter how strange, often has a way of speaking truths we'd rather not face.
Nag-iisa na lang ako.
Saan man tayo mapadpad, huwag lilingon pabalik. Madurog man ating paa sa bubog at